What's going on, guys? Today we are talking about the Restrict Act, and this is actually going to be the subject of the full show that comes out a little bit later, but it's a big enough deal, it's important enough that I wanted to do a YouTube specific video for it as well. So the Restrict Act is nominally a bill that is meant to provide the tools for the US government to ban TikTok. But for many of us who are looking at it, it feels much closer to something resembling a Patriot Act 2.0 or a Patriot Act for the internet, which is another way of saying that it is a sweeping expansion of powers, of government powers, of executive authority in the name of what should be nominally a relatively targeted cause, in this case, the banning of TikTok. So let's talk a little bit about where this came from, why TikTok is so out of favor, and what some of the concerns are with the Restrict Act. I think that to understand this happening, you really have to understand how American opinions of China have changed. If you look back in 2017, you see America is net unfavorable when it comes to its take on China. It's 47% unfavorable versus 44% unfavorable versus 44% favorable, excuse me. This is according to Pew Research. But over the last 5 years or 7 years, I guess, it's changed dramatically. In 2022, only 16% of Americans had a favorable opinion of China, while 82% had an unfavorable opinion. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for this. There's a growing awareness and concern around human rights abuses in China, but there's also a broader sense of China being an economic and political threat to American global power. This is obviously something that has played out in American politics. If you look at the 2020 election between Biden and Trump, one of the only things that they agreed with was that they needed to be tough on China. In fact, there was a lot of who would be tougher on China going around in that election cycle. But back in the Trump era, TikTok was already coming under scrutiny, and there were a couple reasons for that. One is just that TikTok was such an emergent force in terms of not just social media, but in terms of just the way that Americans spend their free time. In 2020, in their Q2 earnings letter, Netflix identified TikTok for the first time as a competitor, and by 2022, last year, TikTok had actually beaten Netflix as the second most popular app for those under 35, being beaten out only by YouTube, which, by the way, has been building tools specifically and platforms specifically to compete with TikTok in the form of YouTube Shorts. Now, this would be one thing if this was just a new emergent social media force. Maybe we would still have conversations around whether it's healthy to have 150 million Americans on any platform, but it's not just any platform. It is a platform that is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, and that has been the legal pretense for why US politicians have tried to get rid of it or wanted to get rid of it. So in August of 2020, then President Trump signed an executive order, effectively banning TikTok in the US. The executive order would have more or less made it impossible for TikTok to update itself in the app stores, and it would have made it impossible for advertisers to work with TikTok. So by all means and ways, it would have been a ban. Now, this got very caught up in a political process. It got extended and pushed back until finally Biden took over from Trump in early 2021 and signed his own executive order reversing this one. But Biden was still concerned with similar issues, right? He wasn't excited about TikTok any more than Trump was for the same reasons, these sort of concerns around China. And so he asked the Secretary of Commerce to investigate whether TikTok was a threat to U.S. national security. So fast forward 2 years, all of this has been percolating, all of this has been building, and it culminates just in the last couple of weeks with a hearing, really a grilling, as the word here from Reuters is, of the CEO of TikTok, Shou Chew. This was an incredibly contentious 5-hour hearing that was just full of intense questioning. And as I read Mike Solana say, and I think this was a great description, he basically said that it was contentious because of the combination of, on the one hand, real national security concerns around China, but also the fact that US politicians just hate tech. This is something I did an entire video about a couple weeks ago, why both the right and the left hate tech, big tech, even if it's for different reasons. So this happened, and one of the really interesting things was the reaction of TikTokers. For many, it was the first time that they had seen elected officials in a hearing setting like this, and boy, were they not impressed. And as someone who's watched 5 years of crypto hearings, it was at least a little gratifying to watch kind of an entire generation that hasn't been mobilized or radicalized yet see just how technologically inept the people in charge of making policy that dictates how they interact with technology are. There was one point where a congressman seemed not to really understand Wi-Fi or how it worked. It was just bad. And so the broad perception of TikTokers about this ban was that the whole China artifice was just pretense and that US politicians had very different aims. Well, one of those aims came to bear in what has been called, or what is now known as, the Restrict Act. I'm not going to give you the full name. It's one of those stupid acronyms that politicians love putting together. But the Restrict Act is nominally an act that was introduced in March in order to give the US government the power to ban TikTok, power which many already think that they have in various ways. The White House was very and is very supportive of this. You can see this statement here from the National Security Advisor, who basically says that this gives us the tools we need to mitigate, quote, national security risks posed by high-risk technological businesses operating in the U.S., and so on and so forth. So this bill is introduced. The White House is widely supportive, and many in the political class are also supportive. This is seen as a highly positive thing. Now, for many of us, though, this is an incredibly problematic act. You have Coin Center, who has just published a piece as of yesterday. The Restrict Act creates blanket authority with few checks to ban just about anything linked to a quote-unquote foreign adversary. Coin Center points out that this is there are similar powers here to what the Treasury Department already has with OFAC, which is their group that deals with sanctions. But this Restrict Act doesn't actually have any of the safeguards put in place that OFAC has to deal with. And that might be shocking given how much authority and how much power the sanctions bodies of the US actually already have. So that's one big issue for them. The other big issue is that the way in which this idea of foreign adversaries can be designated is an incredible expansion of power. It's extremely nebulous and could be applied in ways far beyond what the initial theoretical intention is, which is just to ban TikTok. So there are a ton of problems. That's Coin Center's take. They also do talk about what the implications for crypto might be and how it might be used as a tool to help ban transactions with crypto or even ban entire crypto platforms. But there are others who are concerned as well. So Greg Price here writes, the bill to ban TikTok is absolutely terrifying. It gives the government the ability to go after anyone they deem as a national security risk, at which point they can access everything from their computer to video games to their ring light. This is a Patriot Act for the internet. He hones in on something that many, many commentators have honed in on, that if you find yourself in violation of this act, for example, using a VPN to use something like TikTok, they could put you in jail for 20 years or fine you $1 million based on how this is currently written. I think Greg's tweet right here, though, really nails it, where he says, if this was about banning TikTok, they would pass a bill that simply bans TikTok. But the Uniparty is trying to create the same system of domestic spying they did after 9/11 for the internet, but on steroids. This is a real common theme. Glenn Greenwald writes, we spent 4 years worrying the U.S. government is trying to control the internet and censor the content Americans can hear, and now we're ready to hand it the power to ban entire platforms at will. And this point, I think, is super salient. The belief that China is a threat to the U.S. does not mean every government demand for power in its name is justified, just as the post-9/11 rage for al-Qaeda did not justify every U.S. government policy enacted in the name of stopping terrorism. Balaji puts it even simpler, in more simple terms. The Restrict Act is the American Great Firewall. Become China in the name of beating China. So look, my standpoint on all of this is not that we shouldn't be having a national debate around A, TikTok specifically, but B, social media and privacy and data privacy more broadly. In fact, for those of you who are seeing all these sort of like right-aligned voices and are thinking I'm just presenting that view, there are fewer and farther between, but there are some on the progressive left who are bringing up similar concerns. AOC put out a video where she talked about the fact that this doesn't address the core underlying issue of data collection processes among all social media platforms and data privacy in the US. So it's not just the far political right who's opposed to this, it's also the political left. The problem is that on either side of the aisle, they are in the minority. I want there to be these important national conversations, but I want us to be talking about the issues that we're talking about, not be talking about one thing when a bill that is about something else entirely is snuck in its name. If the government is going to expand executive authority around these types of national security concerns, that debate needs to be had on its own terms, not just in the name of quickly shoving through something that would nominally ban TikTok. And if they want to ban TikTok, they need to use the tools that they have to first convince the public that that's a reasonable thing to do, and then two, to actually do it without expanding their own authority and powers. And by the way, this isn't just America that's dealing with these types of issues. Right now, there's also a proposal in the EU to basically scan all private chats on all social media platforms in order to prevent child trafficking and child sexual abuse, which of course is something that everyone wants to prevent, but has huge security and civil liberty implications. So all around the world, we're dealing with a core central issue, which is what authority governments have over the internet and over our communications on the internet, and what we're willing to give up in terms of freedom when it comes to having theoretically more safety. These are the fundamental questions of government. They're just in a new context. They're good debates to have, but they need to be had in public and with people getting to loudly state their points of view. For what it's worth, I think that these conversations get only more important in the emergent AI era, which we are racing into right now. So anyways, guys, that is the Restrict Act. I think it's hugely problematic. I'm glad to see that there is more discussion about it, and I hope that it gets basically shoved to the side for a different conversation if they actually want to have the conversation about TikTok specifically. I will keep you posted as this evolves, as I expect it will. Until then, peace.